الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونتوب إليه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون عباد الله أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام الحمد لله على نعمة الإيمان الحمد لله على نعمه كلها ظاهرها وباطنها أما بعد. All praises due to Allah. We thank Him, we express gratitude for those gratitude and blessings that are manifest and those that are away from our comprehension. I wanted to start today's sermon by centering and bringing to our attention and consciousness Hind Rajab. Now for those who don't know Hind Rajab, and the media that not only erases Hind Rajab but the 14,000 Palestinian children's babies, young and old. Hind Rajab is the 6-year-old girl that she called from a car that was in part of Gaza. She took the car with her uncle, her aunt, and 3 other of her cousins. Now the Israeli military shot at the car. Her uncle died, her aunt died, 3 cousins died, and she was calling, pleading for help while sitting in a car, trying to see if the silence of the world might break through the wreckage of the car, the wreckage of human consciousness, the wreckage of indifference. But some heard her cry, so the Palestinian Red Crescent sent a car with 2 to try to rescue her, hearing that she is still alive, a 6-year-old girl in that location. The Israeli military attacked the ambulance with the 2 from the Red Crescent, killing them instantaneously in that location. The story continues. For 12 days, the search for Hind is taking place. Questions to the State Department spokespersons. And I always say I never saw a person that is supposedly educated at the highest level of service being unable to provide an answer about not only Hind Rajab, but actually deflecting and saying the Israelis are gonna investigate. 12 days until they find Hind Rajab in that car, sitting with 5 other dead family members. And next to her are the ambulance with 2 from the Palestinian Red Crescent killed, shattered glass, but more importantly, shattered world standards, whether it's international law, human rights, and whatever we could speak of. We still want to have accountability. Every human life is important. Every human life is sacred. And I know in certain corners, Palestinian lives don't matter. Black lives don't matter. Latino lives on the border and in our community don't matter. We're still living in a world that the overwhelming majority of the world still are not accorded their full human existence and human value. So I want to speak today on a number of issues. I want to begin by actually speaking of both religious texts and oppression. Now I know in certain corners, people use religion as an instrument of power. And if we look throughout history, always religion have been instrumentalized as the handmaiden of power. And we need to understand there is imperial religion and there is the religion of prophets, of common folks, of people who walk and plead not only with God, but the human collectivity to change their condition. Now, from the Islamic tradition, and again to share with people, the foundational aspect of the Islamic tradition is a call to justice and mercy. That every Friday we have a call saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. That God commands to justice. God commands to justice. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ. That God commands to justice. And therefore at the root of Islamic tradition and every religious tradition that came from prophetic figures is a call to justice. So much so that we have one of the 99 names of God in the Islamic tradition is Al-Adl, the all just. Every element of justice that manifests in the world is but a reflection of the divine name that manifests in the world. But actually is much more than this. In an authenticated tradition of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, he said, which is the statement is from God, narrated to us by the voice of the Prophet. He said, Ya ibadi, O my servants, Inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi. This is God speaking of his voice, first person voice, that I have prohibited injustice on myself. وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مُحَرَّمًا. And I made it among you forbidden. فَلَا تَظَالَمُوا. Do not oppress one another. Now the wisdom of this is the following. Oppression exists in the world. But I don't want to be a person that give any credence to a religious person or secular person, a person in high places or middle places, a person in the corporate entity or in the White House that should be called the Black House. I don't want to see anyone that says that their oppression is to be articulated because God permits it. It is out of our human volition that we engage in justice and we try to justify it by attributing it to a divine purpose. Injustice is not divine. Why? God's name is Al-Adl, the all just. Calls us to justice and to also act in the world in expressing justice in all circumstances. Now, in addition to this, God asks of us to be, as a human being, witnesses. And to be a witness, you have to be upright. In order to be a witness, you have to fulfill the requirements of actually speaking truth to power, even against your own self. Even against your own self. The Quran says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. O you who believe, be a people that are establishing uprightness, establishing the scales of justice, including against your own self. So, Biden, you have to say the truth, and you have to be a witness on your own self. State Department spokespeople, you have to be people that stand for uprightness and say the truth even against your own self. And I know in here we're speaking metaphorical for them, right? Because once you put the powder on the face to get in front of the camera, you lose the sense of whom you're speaking to, for, and the purposes of this language. And we're saying in this to them as a remembrance, فَذَكِّرْ. Right? So we'll remember him to recall them, because we're going to be witnesses on their transgression and witnesses across. So say the truth. Establish the scale of justice even against your own self. So, first point, oppression is not divine. Injustice is a construct of the human beings. And don't allow anyone to hang their coat, short or long, on any divine purpose in these circumstances. Now, the second point that I wanted to make, which is to say that we are in a world today that is driven by greed, envy, and indifference. Now, many of these individuals today that speak about imperial policy, I want to set the record straight. The reason that Europe, the United States, and those people who think they are important, and they do, they are in the region that we call the Arab world. They are in the region that is Latin America. They're in Africa and Asia for one reason: it is for greed. Natural resources, trying to capture markets, trying to continue to have access to gas, natural gas, to oil. That is the center of their policy. But because they're cowards, because they hide behind all types of rhetoric, they try to tell us that they're there for civilization. Literally, they don't know the beginning of the C in civilization, nor the N at the end of the word. They're missing all that which is in between. They're rooted in greed. They're rooted in constant envy. They're rooted in the indifference to the human suffering. We in here are living the consequences of 500 years plus of this so-called modern world that is rooted in colonialism. From the time that Columbus sailed west to try to reach India till today. Columbus actually in his project was saying that he will go west in order to come back and conquer Palestine and the Holy Land. That was in his diaries. And to try to acquire as much gold and silver for this continuation of the Crusades. So much so that when Great Britain, and we always say as Muslims and global South people, Alhamdulillah, Great Britain is no longer great. It's only God that is great. Great Britain, when they captured Palestine in December 10th, 1917, said this is the coming of end of the crusade after 672 years of Muslim presence in Palestine. They accuse us of not actually having an understanding of history. I would say they don't understand history. Their history is one rooted in greed, envy, and indifference. So, 1492 is an important historical period for the world, both in the Western Hemisphere as well as in the world. All of the genocides that took place in this massive Western Hemisphere, and we are standing in here on the land of the Ohlone people. And you cannot speak of Palestine, you cannot speak of colonialism, you can't speak of oppression without understanding that this new world ushered by Columbus led to the genocide of indigenous people, north, south, east, west, in this land that today we are here. So much so that even UC Berkeley still have bones of Native Americans that are part of their anthropological collection. And it's only recently, 2019, that they have signed an agreement to repatriate these bones, including changing the names of buildings. They tell us, leave history aside. These are nice buildings with people's names on it. Why do you need to keep trying to undo history? We're not trying to undo history. We're trying to correct the continued pains of history that is still among us today. And we need to remind them of this because oppression of the past continue to the present. Now we need to speak about a third issue today. And the third issue that we need to center is anti-Palestinian racism. Anti-Palestinian racism. Anti-Palestinian racism, again, some of our colleagues that have done some research, which to build upon. One aspect of this anti-Palestinian racism is the denial of the Nakba. The denial of the Nakba. Some in high places, including in here in our surrounding, they say that the Palestinians have taken on the wrong narrative. And this is coming from people who have not done any primary research, but yet they have the audacity to speak of everything and everything under the sun. I would tell them, why don't you have a discourse about falafel, because that's as far as your specialty goes. That we are holding on a wrong narrative. There is nothing wrong with ethnic cleansing. That is not a narrative, that is a historical fact. If you have not read the content of what the Nakba was about, we recommend a few books for you, not only with Palestinian historians, but also of increasingly some Jewish historians, and paramount among them recommend the work of both Rashid Khalidi, Walid al-Khalidi, Ibrahim Abu Lughod, Edward Said, but also Ilan Papi and others, Avish Lime. There's so many, right? Including, if you want to say, a Zionist new historian, Benny Morris, already accorded the fact that the Nakba occurred. But he went on to justify the Nakba by saying the following. Again, sometimes historians don't understand what they're saying. We'll give them not the best. He says, if you want to make an omelet, you have to crack eggs. Again, I have written about it. It's in my book. If you want to make an omelet, you have to crack eggs. So the Palestinian that were ethnically cleansed, 110 massacres, Deir Yassin massacre, all these massacres were in order to actually make a settler colonial omelet. Right? That again is undisputed in relations to the Nakba. So part of anti-Palestinian racism is the denial of the Nakba. Second aspect of anti-Palestinian racism is the attempt to silencing Palestinian voices. Right? I know we all have witnessed our sister Tabassum from USC, the valedictorian of the campus, that she was selected to speak on the graduation. The fact that she had a post, they used a social media post in order to remove her from speaking in the graduation. But we don't need to go to USC. We could actually come close here to campus, our sister Malak from the law school. Now our dean today written an article in the Atlantic basically saying that Malak does not have free speech at his home. And I would say, being intellectually rigorous, I would say he has a point. But his point would be valid if his home was only a private invitation that is not actually part of a public invitation to the students of the university. and that the invitation and the dinner was not paid for by all of us students and the university budget, meaning it's public fund. So Shermaninsky, who is foremost as a constitutional expert, his textbook is taught all over, is trying to make an argument that Malak did not have the right to free speech at his home in the event. And I say the courts will decide this. But let's be very clear that the argument about free speech is not the same argument about Catherine Fisk assaulting Malak in the house. Those are not the same. No matter what your position is, and we could debate free speech, again the argument free speech, we could go back, you can't yell fire around the theater, and then the free, what you call the free markets of ideas, we could make an argument. You can't yell a fire in a crowded theater. That was the standard when activists from the labor movement, from individuals to try to get labor rights, that's when the court actually restricted and limited the scope of free speech. But in the late 1960s, the case that they say that we are living in a free market of ideas, that was the case that actually from white supremacists, and the Supreme Court actually ruled in their behalf. So law and the courts often is made out of social conditions, and the social conditions again does not make that law is Moses going up to the hill and bringing down the law or the tablet. So we need to understand that will be an area that we need to contest. So silencing Palestinian voices and their allies is part of anti-Palestinian racism. Now I want to give you a little bit more in here. The university, this is April month, is supposedly Arab Heritage Month. Again, alhamdulillah, mashallah, they recognize that there's Arab. But the university was supposed, again, most of often when we remembered like the Guantanamo Bay, right, Abu Ghraib and so on. So they decided that there is such thing called Arab Heritage Month. The university was supposed to release a statement to congratulate us and to say we're celebrating Arab Heritage Month. The statement did not come out. That's half of the problem. The draft that was given to the university was sent out to the local Zionist community to vet the statement and see whether it's actually fulfilled the needs. That's why the statement didn't come out. You're being too sensitive to the Arab. You're telling them you're great. Right? So the university did not release the statement, but only made possible to actually, for those who don't have the best interests of the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian community, to actually look and examine the statements. I always say diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to Arab, Palestinian, and Muslims is lack of diversity, lack of inclusion, and for sure it is centered on exclusion in the process. So that is the quintessential anti-Palestinian racism in high places, including in our university. A third element of anti-Palestinian racism is the constant defamation that we are subjugated to. There isn't a person that speaks for Palestine, and there isn't a faculty member, a Palestinian faculty member, except that they face constant defamation, almost non-stop. And the university does not respond because you only are supposed to be a threat, not to be a person that is legitimately could be supported in any way possible. So anti-Palestinian racism is a reality that many of us face on a daily basis. So the research on this is undergoing. I think we're going to be having more surveys and more work on anti-Palestinian racism, and it intersects with Orientalism. It intersects with Islamophobia in certain elements. So that's where we need to actually understand what is taking place. Now, the third major issue that I want to speak about today. If we noticed or witnessed Columbia University and their president, Na'mat Shafiq, if we could recognize her, right? She went up to testify in a congressional hearing. Not only she added to the defamation of the pro-Palestine movement, but she took the bait of labeling and pushing anti-Semitism as the problem on college campuses. Now, some of these Congress people that were there, both in the committee but around, are characters that you need to ask the question about their stand on anti-Semitism in reality. So, Representative Elise Stefanik, she actually pushed the replacement theories, right, in her discourse, and she blames what they call the globalist, and more importantly, speaking of George Soros, who was a Jewish person, affluent, he tends to donate to progressive causes, including supporting the movement to protect immigrants and so on. So Stefaniak and others constantly speak about George Soros as the problem. Now, for those who don't know, there is a long history of white supremacists from way back during the Inquisition period till today. Anything that goes wrong in a society, they actually projected on the Jewish person. Right? So in here, Stefaniak, who's speaking about anti-Semitism herself, her center of epistemology is anti-Semitism structurally. So we need to understand this. This other person, Representative Mary Miller, on June 6, 2021, she actually quoted Hitler, right, before the assault on the Capitol and before the attempt to undo the election results. It's again not me, it's actually Representative Mary Miller, and today she's standing up to speak about anti-Semitism. Another one, Tim Walberg, who suggested bombs dropped on Gaza like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Really a very soft person in terms of his understanding, and then many in Congress are asking to flatten Gaza. That does not count for any form of deep, deep racism and completely dehumanization of the Palestinians. Now, Representative Rick Allen cited Genesis when he was questioning Naamat Shafiq and saying to her, I will bless those who bless you, meaning Israel, and curse those who curse you. Then he asked Shafiq if she wanted Colombia to be cursed. Right? He also suggested the school offer a class on the Bible. Right? Now, I know sometimes our Congress people are very slow. They have not read anything since possibly they were hanging at 7-Eleven. Right? So we'll actually inform them that all undergraduate students at Columbia take classes that have either reading the Bible in its totality or section of it. So that's, again, it's not an argument, but you should do your due diligence, right, if you're asking the question. But more importantly, why a congressman sitting in there and ask about the biblical requirements of a president of a secular university, and he is supposedly in a secular institution. Again, you could speak about religious discourses, and I need to remind this individual, this is part of mobilizing text in support of settler colonialism. There are 7 elements of settler colonialism. One aspect of settler colonialism is mobilization of religious texts, in particular Christianity, to legitimize the killing, destruction, and genocide. If you have not read it, I recommend a few readings on the subject. Now, if he's citing Genesis, I need to remind him also that part of the biblical text engages in what's called the curse of Ham. If you don't know, the curse of Ham is one of those elements in the biblical text that are used to justify racism, white supremacy, and continue to say that the darker people with, I consider them to be melanin endowed, are basically the curse of God, versus those who are lighter complexion. This is, again, some of the religious distortions that could to be used, and many actually take this as a way to authenticate their religious worldview. What we are experiencing today is the weaponization of anti-Semitism in order to silence, to derail, to defame pro-Palestinian movement in this country, and that will not stand. Weaponization of anti-Semitism that actually focuses on the Palestinian dreams, aspiration, and almost 100 years of attempting to be free, to try to say that if you're for Palestinian freedom, by necessity, you need to be defined as anti-Semitic. So far that even this Friday prayer, as well as the prayer that was held in Colombia, those who are trying to silence labeled this prayer and the prayer in Colombia as a form of anti-Semitism. That is a complete distortion, weaponization of anti-Semitism at the highest level. Now let me expand a little bit more. The majority of Zionists in the world are not Jewish. The majority of Zionists in the world are not Jewish. And I would say increasingly large segment of our American Jewish community, as well as Jewish communities in Europe, are beginning to be anti-Zionist, especially those who are 35 and below. And we need to also speak the following. Zionism was not born in the Muslim world. Zionism was not born in the Muslim world. It was born in the confines of Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, but also Western Europe. Was not born in Iraq, was not born in Egypt, was not born in Turkey, in Syria, in Iran, in Yemen, or anywhere in between. It was a byproduct of European anti-Semitism, and European anti-Semitism have not been addressed, have not been solved. They still are holding on the basic principle, basic understanding of so-called elevating so-called Western civilization without knowing the C and the N of that term, civilization. So I say that the majority of those who are Zionists are not Jewish. The largest segment in the United States is the evangelicals, where they actually are acting in millenarian ways. They think it's the end of time, and the way for the end of time to arrive is to actually reconstitute the Jewish people, as far as their ideology, into Palestine for Armageddon to take place. Now, interestingly, again, we talk about imperial religion and regular folks' religion. They posit that Muhammad, Moses, Jesus are basically the arms salesmen of the global military-industrial complex. So it's actually almost a marriage of convenience. You ask these individuals, what happens in Armageddon and supposedly with the return of Jesus, peace be upon him? They'll inform you and they'll tell you that the Jewish population, 2/3 of it will be put to death. 1/3 will convert to Christianity. As far as Muslims, we don't even qualify. We are the right hand of Satan. Right? We don't even belong to actually get a job in LinkedIn to see as part of this global, what you call, worldview that they have. You don't take my word for it. Just listen to some of these evangelical, if you have the stomach for it or the time. I know that you don't want. Listen to it on the radio, listen to it on TV. That's basically trying to use religion in partnership of military-industrial complex, corporate type of understanding in order to achieve death and destruction. I also want to say the following, and for those people who have, please listen to me in the past, we have increasingly Muslim Zionists coming around. Muslim Zionists, who mobilize also Islamic religious texts in order to justify their own worldview, which tends to try to create normalization and center their relationship with Israel as a way to try to push themselves into the modernity of nothingness that they have elevated themselves into it. And that's, if you look at the Muslim world, where are the Muslim world? Basically, they are subject to this type of embracing Zionism as it's been constructed, especially in partnership with Israel and partnership with the United States. So we need to challenge this notion relative to weaponization of anti-Semitism and make sure that we continue to mobilize, organize in ways that have not seen in a long period of time. Now in Arabic we say, ضربني وبكى وسبقني واشتكى. There's like this proverb that he struck me and began crying. Then he went ahead of me and lodged a complaint. So all of the circumstantial evidence for law that you are the one who's guilty, even though that you have been struck. So Israel strikes the Palestinians for the past 75 years, and then if you add the British for another almost 30 years, and then every time it's the Palestinians that are deemed to be guilty, because all of the media covers, right, the fact that they're crying, and they cover and center their complaint against us. So this again from an old Arab proverb, right? ضربني وبكى وسبقني واشتكى. That's what the phenomena we are dealing with today. Now the fourth point, I know I'm taking your time, but it's an important point, an important period for us. Fourth point is to think of media, and media, mainstream media in particular, and corporate media. It is not coincidental that the media is aiding and abetting, both in silencing Palestinian narrative as well as amplifying and pushing pro-Israel narrative, including from various segments in the United States. Now, in order to understand that 90% of all the media that we consume, the books that we read, the films that you watch, the news that you actually look at, 90% of it is produced to us by corporate media. And the corporate media, on the one hand, produces the material, and on the other hand, is invested in death machine. Many of these conglomerates, right, are invested in all types of the economy. So you have GE, which has one of their, what you call motto, we bring all things to light. Indeed you do, but you actually happen to destroy them again, because one arm of you brings light and the other side produces weapons of mass destruction. Similarly here at the university, right? You know, our motto is about light, right? But we have the best research in death machines. We run the two military labs in this university, as well as the UC system, Los Alamos and Livermore lab. So on the one hand, we produce the literature of, or study the literature of Shakespeare, and every once in a while Rumi and the others, but on the other hand, we make sure to destroy and support and send bombs for 11 universities in Gaza to be destroyed. Every library in Gaza is been destroyed. Every bookstore has been destroyed. Every collection of archives have been destroyed, and yet total silence from the so-called university establishment that say that they actually are founded or attempting to provide education and light. So media responsibility is utmost in here. That's why the cries of Hind Rajab does not get to everyone. That's why 14,000 Palestinian kids, babies and children don't get to anyone. 40,000 so far been dead and killed by Israel does not get to anyone. 75,000 already injured doesn't get to anyone. 80% of homes, houses, all of the hospitals are inoperational, does not get to anyone. Because we say, if a tree falls in the forest and it's not reported, it's not in an image, it's not on the news, it's not reported, it really fall. So I would say 40,000 Palestinians are not dead because they have been completely erased by our corporate media. And we continue to center this debate about anti-Semitism, the fear of people speaking on Palestine, while a genocide is unfolding. 3 articles in the front page of the New York Times about campus anti-Semitism, total silence on mass graves being discovered in a Nasser hospital. Total silence, total obfuscation, total indifference to the suffering of those. That is the media, and it's not only at this point. During the Iraq War, the New York Times, the newspaper of record, had 8 articles pushing the Iraq War, pushing weapons of mass destruction, pushing for the United States to engage in regime change. And for those who could go to Google and search in YouTube, you could find Netanyahu coming and testifying in Congress, calling on the United States to go and attack Iraq. We have a long memory as well as we have the record, because that's what you said. At the time, we spoke in here and spoke down in San Francisco opposing the Iraq War. But those who push for the Iraq War today are coming back, Johnny come lately, to try to say that they are the ones who so-called advocating for peace, justice, and international law. You cannot push for war and destruction, 1.5 million Iraqis, and then come back today to claim innocence, or to push again to say that you are the person who are defending constitutional rights, free speech, and so on in this country. So remind them this is the case. I will go a little bit even much earlier. We have the Martin Luther King building in there. It's one that the students actually worked to name it MLK. Now MLK was celebrated, right? I have a dream. Before his death in 1967, 2/3 of the American public was against Martin Luther King. This is after he won the Nobel Peace Prize. New York Times wrote an editorial against him. Washington Post wrote an editorial against him. The Tribune wrote an editorial against him. Even mainstream black press wrote an editorial against him. He was beginning to be a little bit too difficult for the people who don't want the boat to be rocked. Remember, his last effort was to lead a march to speak about the poverty inside this country, and the three evils of society was the speech that he centered. He says the bombs we throw in Vietnam blow up in our city. And that's what we're seeing today. The bombs that we threw in Afghanistan, the bomb that we threw in Iraq, the bomb that we blew up in Yemen, the bomb that we used in Libya, the bomb that we used in Syria are blowing up in our city. So when you walk the streets and you see homelessness in the street, you have to ask Biden, you have to ask Obama, you have to ask George Bush, you have to ask all those, including Nancy Pelosi. You voted for war, you voted for bombs, you set the Death Star, and the result is our people out in the streets. Don't let them make you the person that is guilty for their actual war machine. That's what we need to understand. And in order to justify this, they try to station us or put us against one another. In the Muslim world, I say everybody pushes what I call the sushi theory of politics. Do you know what the sushi theory of politics? They say the Sunnis hate the Shia, and the Shia hate the Sunni, and therefore is the sushi theory of politics. And therefore every John, Joe, and I don't want to say another word because it's respectful of the moment here, you go to 7-Eleven and the person is literally theorizing about Shia and Sunni. They sell weapons to one side and they sell weapons to the other side. They buy oil from one side, they buy oil from the other side, and both they stick them against each other. You go kill each other and say Allahu Akbar while we're happy all the way to the bank. And once you're done, we send you our diplomats to try to settle what is taking place for their own benefits. We are in the region because the region has oil and natural gas and sits at the hubs of global trade. You cannot go anywhere without that region. But we don't want to say this, so Sunni and Shia. Another dimension, which again, these are what I call the pharaonic archetypal discourses. Divide and conquer. The Christians of the Middle East don't like the Muslims in the Middle East, and therefore they fight another. We're coming in here to protect the local Christian population. Now let me tell you, I possibly have more relationship with the Christians in our region, both Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and so on. And we go back to the Crusades. When the Crusaders came, they actually attacked Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians. So they utilize these divisions in order to actually say that we are there. Every utilization of this division is to center intervention. Why? Because in order for us to waste resources and continue to fight in the region and to get people free from the United States to go and volunteer, they have to instrumentalize the divisions that exist in there. All right? And that's, again, whenever people go and say they want to talk, I have a whole list of Christian leadership you want to talk to. Right? I have a whole list from leadership in Palestine. When was the last time they actually brought a Christian Palestinian to speak as a Christian Palestinian to say, we are suffering in the same way that our Muslim brothers and sisters are suffering? Not only that, when was the last time that you actually brought A Jewish person from Iraq, from Morocco, from Libya, or Syria, or Iran, to speak how the long history of relations between Arab, Jewish, Muslim, Christians in this region. European history is not our history. European history is not our history. Europe till today cannot live with the other. It cannot live with the racial other. It cannot live with the religious other. It cannot live with the gender other, because again, during the Inquisition, 100,000 women were burned to the stake because they did not fulfill the orthodoxy at the time. You need to remind them of history, because Johnny come lately from up there in the sky, or those who push this call, they come and give you what you call these nice lectures. These nice lectures no longer cut time. We no longer are interested in listening in the niceties of discourse. We want to see action. If you talk about human rights, we need to see action in human rights. If you speak about the 4 Geneva Convention, we want to see action in the 4 Geneva Convention. We need consistent, not double standard, not hypocrisy that is taking place on a regular basis. So we need to take the media to task. Now, the last point that I want to speak about. I want for us to celebrate our young. I want us to celebrate the Students for Justice in Palestine. I want us to celebrate the Arab Student Union. I want us to celebrate the Muslim student unions. I want us to celebrate the graduate students in the law school. I want to celebrate the graduate students across this country, because they have understood that fear as an ingredient only limits your capacity to transform history and transform society. So today, I want to celebrate all of the young that are the exemplars of courage. And all the media, all of our leadership, all of our civil rights organizations, all of our civil society should uplift the voices and the struggle of the young people, because they're teaching us a lesson that history is made by the young. History is made by the young. You don't need to take my word for it. I will go back all the way to the Prophet Abraham. I know people try to use Abraham as an instrument of colonial dispossession, settler colonialism in Palestine, right? Abraham promises the land. Let me say, when Abraham came from Mesopotamia, he came to Palestine and spoke the language of the Canaanites. When he was in Palestine, he said that he lived as an alien among the Canaanites. And when he wanted to bury his family, he purchased a plot of land in the city of Al-Khalil. I don't like for us to use the term Hebron. The name of the city is Al-Khalil, because the attribute of the Prophet Abraham in the Islamic tradition is Khalilullah, the beloved intimate companion of God. So those who remember and recall, in the tradition, Abraham was a young lad, right? And he spoke against his own people, including his father, who was an idol maker for his community. A young lad. And he went out and literally smashed with his weapons of mass destruction, if you happen to be in the current discourse. He demolished the idols. I say these were the idols of indifference, the idols of ignorance, the idol of commodification of our contemporary world. He was a young lad, and he transformed history so much so that today, in the outermost of the world, we recall his name. Don't let anyone tell you that you are young and you can't make a difference. Every person in history that we study and read was a person that made a difference, especially when they are young. Speak about the prophet Joseph, a young lad that was put in the water well, came out from the water well, and then he became really quintessential person that we speak in relations to liberation theology. Right? Prophet Joseph faced commodification, was sold as an enslaved person, took by a caravan, sold him. He actually became a domestic worker in Egypt. Then he was subject to sexual harassment by a woman actually harassing a man. Again, there is such thing that takes place, sexual harassment. Then he ends up being sent to jail, prison industrial complex in our common day. Then he gets to be educated, knowledgeable, that he actually gives commentary on dreams and end up being elevated to the highs of highs during his period in Egypt. He started as a young lad and continued and transformed history. Every person that we read about in history started as a young people to transform history. So we want to celebrate the young and never ever tell a young person to be silent. Never ever tell a young person to be silent. If you can't listen and hear what they're saying, it's the deafness of your ear, the deafness of your consciousness, your entrapment in the worldly affairs that you don't want to hear. You could have a discourse with them and help. If you need to help and you want to help, you're welcome. But if you want to silence them, then you are not welcome. You belong to a different era, to a different construction, to a different type of discourse that sees the young as instrument to be commodified rather than be transformative. Every movement started by the young, and I speak about this stage in here, Mario Savio stage, or Mario Savio steps. Free speech movement was demonized, but they won their struggle. Anti-apartheid movement was on these steps. They were demonized and they won their struggle. The affirmative action campaign, they were demonized and they still are struggling to get there to win their struggle. The women's movement had considerable work on these steps and they were demonized, continued to demonize, and they won struggle. Never, ever in the history of political struggle that a struggle was not demonized. But history remembers those who were demonized and completely forgets those who stood at the doors to try to stop transformation, justice, and freedom from emerging. So we need to be a people that support the movement at this point. And it's taken place like fire across the country and across the world. Just yesterday in different parts of the world, not only in the United States, in France, in Belgium, in South Africa, in Bolivia, people in the universities are mobilizing. So history is actually being done in front of our eyes. Some are going to demonize by writing. Some of us are going to make history. So go out and make sure to make history, because the moment belongs to you and history belongs to you, and you have the capacity to translate and transform the world. The person you're waiting for is here. Get up and do the work for justice. Do the work for freedom. Do the work for transformation in our world today. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I want to conclude with the following. That Palestine is unique because it's the last settler colonial project to be commissioned. But it's important for us to actually locate it in the intersection of both global south and global north. That the fact that the majority of the world feels and aligns and see Palestine in their own specific struggle, we need to actually think of it here locally and domestically. I say there is a Gaza in every town and every city in America. There is a Gaza of dispossession that is among us and around us. There is a Gaza of indifference that is there, that needs to be challenged. There is a Gaza of ignorance and compounded ignorance that we need to challenge. I feel that I express my solidarity with Gaza and the Palestinian. I'm Palestinian. I see myself in the eyes of El Salvadorians that are on the border. I see my eyes in the homelessness and the people that are in the streets that are direct outcome of our corporate greed. I see myself in the way that different people that are literally have to go in debt from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, including our students who are actually literally graduate with a debt. And the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, says, indebtedness is a form of creating cowardice, because when you're in debt, you no longer have the freedom to express yourself. So we need to actually center our ability to eliminate debt from people, to transform our economy. I am a person that have always been firmly believing that education should be free. There is no need for us to actually have education that make you be in bondage. Healthcare should be free and available to everyone. If we could send 26 billion to Israel and 61 billion to Ukraine and 992 billion in military expenditure, there should not be a reason that anyone from us in this country or other parts of the world that should go to bed hungry, that should not be able to go to a hospital, should not be able to get the medicine that they need, should not be able to have the shelter that they need. That is a result of a system that is no longer capable of even addressing its need. The fact that you're part of the 1% does not make you actually be in a good position. If I'm making $1 million and you're making nothing, our average income is 500,000. You're actually eating nothing, hungry and suffering, and I'm eating caviar. That does not give us an indication of what the society. We need to have a complete transformation so we connect Palestine, we connect Gaza to the conditions that are here. The time for us for a new politics is today. The time for transformation is today. The time for us to have a mass movement that will change the future horizon is today. And lastly, as we finish this prayer, I want you to thank all the people that have provided security for us today. I want you to understand that this is a moment of solidarity. This is a moment of actually seeing our brothers and sisters, and I see some of our Jewish brothers and sisters, they've been here. We need to understand that's a historical moment. I see some of our Asian American brothers and sisters in here. They need to be celebrated. I know our Latino brothers and sisters in here. I know our white brothers and sisters in here. I see women, I see men. We need to celebrate them because at the root of it, they want to divide us. And what we say, unity, solidarity will transform history. And so let's be a people that transform history. The time is now. The time for us to change the world is all of our collective responsibility. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم إني داع فأمنوا. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا بالخير شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي بالخير ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم ارحم المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم اشف مرضى المسلمين جميعا يا رب العالمين. اللهم خفف عن إخواننا في فلسطين يا رب العالمين. اللهم أيدهم بنصر من عندك يا رب العالمين. اللهم خفف عنهم اللهم خفف عنهم اللهم خفف عنهم. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.